I just think from the beginning, and I'm not trying to do the whole, hey, I told you so, I'm always right, which I am, let's be honest. And I'm good looking. But I think Brian Kelly was an awkward fit at LSU from the jump, Jake. I think he was never a good fit there.
Yeah, I think that Brian Kelly is someone who is always a solid name to hire, but never seems to get across the finish line. And that's the hard part with this conversation is we're talking about a guy who, won most of the games that he coached in at LSU. He ran a solid program. Like, they obviously are a good team, but they weren't national championship good. And we're seeing this trend now where it's not good enough just to win games anymore. It's not good enough just to be a solid developer as a head coach. It's not good enough to be liked in the community, if you will. Like, you have to win at the highest level or you're going to get fired. And now, we're at a point where you're going to get fired in the middle of the year as soon as your season's over. And I hearken all the way back to, in light of we told you so, I hearken back to what Utah did with their head basketball coach. As soon as you knew you weren't getting into the tournament, he got fired. That's exactly what this is with Brian Kelly. I mean, Mike Gundy. Any other head coach you want to look at. And that's what teams are doing now, man. And it's just a very volatile space right now.
Yeah, and I would again say let's go back to Brian Kelly talking about family.
It's a great night to be a Tiger. I'm here with my family, and we are so excited to be in the great state of Louisiana.
It was just a wrong fit.
Stick.
And I think the hard part is if you know anybody from Louisiana, the South, anybody from that neck of the woods, they don't want you to come down there and try to pretend you've been there your whole life. I think that's a huge mistake. I've been told directly by multiple college football people in the know that he just didn't embrace the history and tradition of LSU. Brian Kelly wanted to allegedly leave all that behind and have it be Brian Kelly's LSU Tigers. And that's just not the way this was ever going to work. That's not what college football is. That's not what alumni bases and donors and NFL alumni specifically want. They want to be ingratiated. They want to help grow the program. You have to respect the people who have come before you. And frankly, Brian Kelly just did not do that. And I think that's why he's no longer the head coach at LSU. Now, they're going to pay him $800,000 a month for the next 9,000 years because here we are in the middle of a conversation and it's another massive buyout in college football, which, hey, if you can get that kind of money, knock yourself out, right? I mean, it is really tough to argue that Brian Kelly is a good head coach. Now, will he ever coach again? Does he want to coach again? I have no idea. But what I do know is I don't believe for a second that Brian Kelly was the right fit, Jake. And maybe I just believe in that job too much. But I wholeheartedly believe that Brian Kelly is somebody that he needs to be humbled. And I hope that's what comes out of this, is that Brian Kelly gets humbled, because I think that's what he needs.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes a long way right now for people to like you, for you to be good in what I like to call people ops, right? I mean, if you're the guy who doesn't win or doesn't perform at a high enough level, whether we're talking college football, head coaches, or whatever it is that you may do, and you're kind of an asshole to everyone, firing you becomes a lot more attractive, not because it would help the company or put LSU on a better track, but because people would be happier in the day-to-day. And so when you're a head coach in college football who has had success in college football, but just hasn't won a national championship, and you're not treating people well, I mean, that makes it awfully easy to be like, yeah, BK, you know what? Yeah, we'd rather suffer the pain of sucking the rest of this year and just kind of playing out the string rather than dealing with you and the attitude and how you're treating people. And I think that that's what is tough. Is that like the family thing, all tongue-in-cheek jokes aside, like you thought it was a good idea to pretend to have a Southern accent, like a week after you did a different interview where you had your normal, cadence and tone. And
Yeah.
it just says like you think that in order for you to relate to people, you got to like bring on a fake accent. Like that's why it's such a problem to do things like that.
Yeah, and I guess the natural progression of things is, okay, well, now what? Because I think this is ultimately the argument. How good is the LSU football job? And I will tell you, I think it's the best available job in the country. I don't even think it's close. I'm not sure it's an argument. I think the LSU job is significantly better than the Florida job. You have access to better talent. You've won recently, and you haven't fired your last 4 coaches. And that's the biggest hang up at Florida is you have not won recently. Coaches have not had success. Now, we can go back and talk about the Will Muschamps and just the bad decisions right out of the gate. We can go back and have that discussion. I think the LSU job is a destination job. I think it is the big of the big, the blue blood, the one that you've been waiting for. That's this job. And I have no doubt that it is the best available job in college football. And Jake, frankly, I don't even think it's close.
Yeah, I mean, I think that LSU is a job that certainly is not a regularly available job in the SEC, number one. I think number two, the LSU job is a job that clearly is in the top half of the SEC. And for the right candidate, I think is in the top probably, 10, 12% of the SEC. When LSU is good, they are very good. And you can go and win national championships there. You can be whatever you want to be there. There is no limitations in resources and ability to go out and get guys. Like it's well documented. The receivers that programs put out. Like there's no question that LSU is a big time job. And now I think we're getting to the point in the conversation over the last several weeks. Obviously it started with Mike Gundy this year, and we've progressed through the James Franklin situation. Now,
Right.
Brian Kelly, we're looking at these different jobs and we're saying, okay, well, clearly I agree with you. LSU is the best available job open, but now it's like, okay, well, if you're a candidate that's good enough to go to LSU, you're also good enough to go to Florida. And so now we have a situation where the SEC has competition within the conference for 2 different coaching gigs, and they're clearly going to pull from probably the Big Ten. I mean, odds are, maybe you get another SEC coach or something. Maybe you get, something like that. But honestly, like if you're filling these roles, like you're clearly going to be looking into other conferences to fill these roles because there's good candidates. And so then it's like, all right, well, what impact does this really have? And the idea that the Dan Lannings of the world or the Lane Kiffins or whoever you want to point to is going to look at these jobs. This has far-reaching implications in college football. If Dan were to leave for any job, that's obviously just a massive gut punch to what's going on at Oregon and honestly for the Big Ten, because we talk so much about how the Big Ten needs as many teams in as possible. And not having Oregon in would be a massive, loss for the Big Ten at this point. So I just think,
Yeah, I think you have to understand, and I know Oregon fan loses their mind every time I talk about this. Oregon's a good job. It's not a great job. Oh, but Monty, you've got Nike money. LSU's got as much Nike money as anybody could possibly ever want. When you are playing at the level of the LSU's, money is not an object. You just finished paying Ed Ogeron, and now you're picking up the ticket on Brian Kelly. And you have to understand that they're not going to hire a nobody candidate. They are not going to hire I don't, from what I've been told, LSU is not interested in coordinators. They are not interested in the Will Steins, the Garrett Rileys. They're interested in the biggest fish in the pond. And I think they are well aware that Nick Saban's not coming out of retirement. And I think they are also well aware that Dan Lanning is the guy in college football right now. And I think what's really interesting is I think the win this weekend really helped Lane Kiffin. I think the biopic that came out on Lane Kiffin really helped Lane Kiffin. Lane Kiffin talking about how his daughter changed his perspective really helps Lane Kiffin. And I think it's going to come down to Dan Lanning and Lane Kiffin. And I think ultimately Dan Lanning has the experience. I think Dan Lanning is younger. I think Dan Lanning is as accomplished as Lane Kiffin is. Because remember, neither one of them's been a head coach of a national champion. And there's something that you need to be acutely aware of. Winning in the SEC is the highest level of competition in college football. And I know people disagree with that. It doesn't really matter. It is a fact that if you can do it in the SEC, you can do it anywhere. That's the advantage that Lane Kiffin has. It's why he is the number one candidate at Florida, in my opinion. And I think why he's 1 and 1A at LSU. But make no mistake about it. If Dan Lanning wants this job, I believe it is his job. I said it on TikTok last night. Sources close to that situation have told me that through intermediaries, LSU has reached out to Dan Lanning and made it known, you're our guy. You're our number one candidate. If you want the job, let's get talking about it. And I think he will have the conversation. And I think Dan Lanning, there is a very strong possibility if they can get together on numbers that Dan Lanning will leave Oregon. And I don't think it's going to be a very difficult choice, frankly, because you're talking about LSU. And everybody, again, is going to tell you, well, he's already at Oregon. He's got the money. But what has Oregon not got? It doesn't have tradition. It doesn't have history. It doesn't have national championships. And you don't have to like it. Oregon's a stepping stone. And Mario Cristobal might be the best example of that. He left Oregon to go to Miami. Oh, but Nike money. Well, why did he step way back to go to Miami and leave Oregon? Well, that was his job. If LSU, if my sources are correct, and LSU has already reached out to Dan Lanning, he will leave Eugene to go to Baton Rouge. He will leave Eugene to win games at night at Death Valley. Dan Lanning will do that because I also think Dan Lanning's acutely aware the phone only rings so many times. He said no to Alabama. And if he says no to LSU, I think the stigma will build around him. And if my sources are correct, he wanted to take the Alabama job, but he didn't want to be the guy to replace Nick Saban at Alabama. And now we know why, because I think Kalen DeBoer is finding out how difficult that is. But make no mistake about it, Brian Kelly isn't Nick Saban. And if LSU truly wants Dan Lanning, I think, will take that job. If they can get together on terms and money, Dan Lanning will take that job. It is one of the crown jewels of college football.
Yeah, I think that people don't want to admit that about Oregon. I just think that Dan's done such a good job at Oregon that the stature of the job itself has gone up. I think that Oregon, Oregon obviously isn't the SEC, and I'm a big believer that guys who, if you're on the Nick Saban coaching tree, I think ultimately you want to land in the SEC. And I think Dan is somebody who is going to do the absolute best job he can for as long as possible wherever he is.
I would agree.
And I think that it's really smart not to want to be the guy that replaces Nick Saban. I just think it's a really tall task. And Dan Lanning also probably understands that he's got a lot of leverage in these conversations. I mean, he is the hot candidate right now. He's the big name. He's the guy that everyone's kind of after, along with Lane Kiffin, obviously.
Yeah.
And I think that Dan understands that he doesn't have to just, take any job that comes his way. And so it's like, all right, well, hey, if you're gonna fire Brian Kelly in the middle of the year, I'm guessing Dan Lanning isn't just jumping for joy to have to address this situation right now with where his football team is at, right? Because they're obviously still in the hunt. They're obviously still, competing and trying to get there. So,
I think Dan Lanning is having the most difficult season of his career at Oregon. I think they were unimpressive against Wisconsin. what was it, 21-7 against Wisconsin. And I think it's a very interesting time. I think it's a very dangerous time for Dan Lanning. And again, I know all of the Oregon alums that watch this show and Ducks fans always get all pissed off when I say Dan Lanning took a crap on an airplane that was flying over X stadium for this university. Oh, he's not leaving. If you think that Oregon's a better job than LSU, I'll just say what you all always say. You don't know ball. The prestige, LSU's not taking second tier guy. They're not taking G5 coach. They're not taking coordinator. They're calling guys like Nick Saban. They're calling Dan Lanning. They're calling Lane Kiffin. How many universities we talked about this last week? How many universities can call Lane Kiffin and be like, "Hey, why don't you come be the next head coach?"
Mm-hmm.
I think right now there's two, LSU and Florida. And I think it's going to be very tough to get Lane Kiffin out of the SIP because what he's built there, and they are good. And I'll continue to tell you, he's got a really good quarterback and he's got another really good defense. And they continue to show it on the field week in and week out. And I think that Lane is aware of that. And it's really tough because you're about to have Ty Simpson win the Heisman Trophy. The Bama job ain't opening anytime soon. Kalen DeBoer has quieted all the rumors and all the haters. The Bama job's not opening soon because that is widely regarded as the best job in the SEC. And I think LSU might be a close second. With those fans, that stadium, access to talent, access to money, top of the line, anything you need, we want to win football games. That's what you're looking at. They just paid Brian Kelly $800,000 a month not to coach their football team. And you want to talk to me about Phil Knight money? I don't think money's the issue at LSU.
Clearly not.
Right? And I'm not trying to be a jerk about it because, again, Oregon fan is hearing me say, well, the Oregon job sucks. And never said that. What I said was they don't win national championships there. Dan Lanning went to the college football playoff last year. Well, sort of. He showed up, but they never got off the bus. They just kind of turned around and went back to the airport.
Ohio State?
That's not happening at LSU. Dan Lanning at LSU is a dynasty. And I know a lot of people disagree with me on that, which is fine.
Yeah, I think Duck fan, does have a lot of pride around Oregon and like what Dan's got going there. As they should. I also think that Dan, in my opinion, from a talent perspective, is bringing that roster along a lot, right? Like, obviously has talent,
right?
But at the same time, I think that we saw the shortcomings of the talent he has against Indiana, and I'm certainly not an Indiana fan. But when you talk about comparing these two jobs, like I can guarantee you, Dan Lanning wouldn't have any trouble getting trench workers, if you will, offensive and defensive linemen to come to LSU, the way he is seemingly having a bit of trouble doing that at Oregon. And that's the hard part is like, yeah, Dante Moore's a great quarterback. You've got a good running back room, decent wide receiver room, solid skill position players on defense. But you're small up front. And I just think that Dan is really bringing this roster along. And he deserves a lot of credit for that. At the same time, I don't think it's an indictment on the University of Oregon to say, hey, like, LSU is a premier SEC job, which makes it a premier job in the country. And that to me is what I just think that if you're an Oregon fan and you're uppity today, like I just think you're unwilling to admit where Oregon stacks up. Like Dan is taking Oregon far, bro. Like Dan is taking that program and elevating that program to very high heights. I understand he hasn't won in the CFP yet, but the fact that he's in the CFP with where he's located and what he's got to get done is impressive, which is why he's a lead candidate for the SEC. And that's just as simple as it is. And I don't want to, disparage the University of Oregon at all, because I think a lot of people like to do that. Oh, well, Oregon sucks. It's terrible. That's not at all what it is. It just is simply saying, like, dude, if you compare the jobs like for like, LSU is a better job. And again, how old is this guy? I mean, this guy ain't even 40 yet. I think he's like 38 or whatever he is.
Yeah.
Like he's not even 40 years old yet, and he's already looking at premier jobs. Dude, if he goes to LSU and wins, let's say 2 national championships and 5 to 7 seasons, I mean that's domination, bro. I mean, I mean, you're on track to be one of the best head coaches of all time in college football at that point at 45 years old. That's wild, dude.
Yeah, and I think he's got the infrastructure to get it done. His wife is wonderfully supportive. Dan has referred to her pretty regularly as his rock, and she's somebody that has made it very clear she is in support of his football career. So I mean, she is. Somebody in TikTok was saying, well, she's not leaving. Somebody was like, oh, she's from Seattle or wherever. I'm like, dude, she's from Kansas City. You really think she's married up to Eugene, Oregon? Right? Like, it, with all due respect to Eugene, there's one thing in Eugene. Right? So I understand. But I'd also tell you, Kansas City is a completely different world than Baton Rouge, landscape-wise. But I'm telling you, his wife is not going to stand in front of him and say, we're not going to LSU. If you get into the comment section on the talk, you'll see it. It was a wild night. And that's why I love TikTok so much. TikTok allows me to completely ignore the residual death hole of X, which is, I hate it is, my life is so much better not reading Twitter, not getting into the notifications. So much better. Let's see. Husker Magic. Dan Lanning is the wrong Dan. Dan Mullen.
That's a good joke, bro. That's exactly a really good joke.
When I'm talking about Dan Lanning and you bring up the name Dan Mullen as a candidate at LSU, tell me you don't know.
I just meant the other Danimal. I don't know who you were talking about.
Monty, you don't know ball. And then you run out with Dan Mullen as a candidate. Like, it makes my head hurt. It makes my head hurt. And I think it's one of those things where I find it so interesting that Dan Mullen, who, I mean, essentially Dan Mullen, with all due respect, Dan Mullen they held the door for Dan Mullen at Florida. And I think when you start looking at what year was that? That was 2020 or 2021 when he left Florida and they completely fell apart. And this is part of the problem at Florida. Is that Florida football is the place to go and have your career die. That's the hard part. And you look at guys like Jim McElwain, 3 seasons. Randy Shannon was the interim. Dan Mullen, 4 seasons. Billy Napier, 4 seasons. And it's like you fired your last 4 coaches. And it's very difficult when you go back and the last guy who had any measurable success was Urban Meyer. And Urban was there for 6 years and was 65-15. And since then, again, I go back to Will Muschamp, who was a miserable failure at Florida. I go back to Charlie Strong. Ron, who remembers guys like Ron Zook? Right? Because you go from Steve Spurrier, and I think, didn't Zook replace Steve Spurrier? He stepped in after Steve Spurrier, and he got run out of Florida. And Urban Meyer comes in and goes 65-15. And then Will Muschamp run out of Florida. Jim McElwain out. Dan Mullen out. Like you don't go there to retire or win national championships. That's the hardest part. You're not, this isn't the 70s anymore where Florida coaches stay there 10 years or the 90s where Spurrier stayed there 11, 12 years.
No.
Florida's a good job. It's not a great job, right? I mean, it just is. It's very difficult. It's very difficult to win in Florida because of the political climate. So, and he says, I think Lanning doesn't leave one bit, but if you told me Alabama or Georgia opened, I would be worried if I was an Oregon fan. Florida or LSU, I have a hard time thinking he dips. So let me understand this. You're saying that LSU's not a better job than Oregon. And I'm here for this conversation. I am here for this conversation. Help me understand what makes Oregon a better job than LSU. Because I will never understand this. What makes this a better job? You don't regularly compete for natties at Oregon. You compete for conference championships. Chip Kelly, like we can keep, like, you can go back to Bellotti, like you can go down the list, and I will. Let's go down the list of Oregon football coaches. And you explain to me how a guy like Rich Brooks solidifies Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
Because they don't. They don't. And Rich was there for what, 25 years? 20 years? Something like that? Right? And you go from you go from Rich Brooks to Mike Bellotti. Mike did a great job. How many national championships did he win? None. How many coach of the years did Bellotti win? None. Then you go to Chip Kelly. How many national championships did he win? None. Right? And Chip Kelly, by all account, was a pretty middle-of-the-road coach. Only there from 09 to 12. And then we just go straight down the hill. Mark Helfrich? None. Willie Taggart? Disaster. Mario Cristobal? Pretty mediocre.
Because it's garbage.
Right? I mean, Chip Kelly... The hard part about Oregon is Chip Kelly, I think what was he, 46-7? People didn't love Chip Kelly.
No.
Did they love Mario Cristobal at 35-13? No, because you don't win. That's the hardest part, and it's cool. What do all those coaches I just talked about have in common outside of Willie Taggart? They all won conference championships.
Mm-hmm.
Now, every one of them won conference championships. Dan Lanning, 35-6, won conference championship. No nannies, no coach of the year. There's no tradition at Oregon. There's no.
Well, there is. It's just not what Oregon fan wants it to be.
Yeah, and it's not what LSU has. Do you guys understand when you look at the history of LSU football? Do you guys understand how good of a conference the SEC has been historically? Do you understand national championships in the modern era? Nick Saban, Les Miles, Ed Ogeron. All of them won national championships. 2019, 2007, 2003. Brian Kelly, 31-11. None and none.
Family.
Right? Like, the next guy that gets this job, and I understand that Oregon fan doesn't love it. The next guy that gets this job has to be capable of winning a national championship. That ain't fucking Dan Mullen. That's not. It's not. Let's just stop with Dan Mullen. That's that, and I mean that with sincerity. It is so much more difficult to hire the best coach in the business, but you have to try. You're not calling James Franklin. And if you call him, you're not trying to hire him. You're trying to hire Lane Kiffin and Dan Lanning. Those are the two brightest coaches in the business right now. Every job will call them, and they should. And I am just going to continue to ask, what makes the Oregon job better than LSU? So much so that the commenter is saying, but Florida or LSU have a hard time thinking he dips. You really think Dan Lanning's not answering the phone if a Baton Rouge number calls him?
Come on, bro.
Yeah, you know. I mean, but I'm here for it, right? I'm here for it, and I think that and the resident idiot, Nike money at Oregon, yeah, because they just paid Brian Kelly $800,000 a month not to coach. They're broke in Baton Rouge. You don't think they have money in Baton Rouge?
Yeah, really struggling to pay the bills in Baton Rouge, you know?
Like this whole idea. By
the way, who's their apparel provider? Oh, that's right. It's Nike. Come on, bro.
I'm telling you, this idea that Nike money's the end all be all. Every school in the SEC has Nike money. Every school in the SEC has Nike money. Every one of them. Because they're making more than anybody else. They have boosters. They have, like, do you understand how many NFL guys played at LSU and currently kick down to LSU? Like, what is, and I understand it's Penn State. All you guys do is get knuckle deep. I totally get it. You guys don't really totally get it. Epstein Island, totally understand it. But at some point, yeah. Welcome to the nightmare, a member for 26 months. Hey, bro, it's Jimmy, the president at LSU, trying to get in touch with Scott Frost, please. Tell me you wouldn't hold the door for Scott Frost if LSU.
We'll see you later.
LSU's AD had another huge buyout, Jimbo at A&M. Yep. Buddy is responsible for negotiating a lot of dead money. Yes, he is.
Buddy.
But that's the other interesting part of the LSU gig. The freaking governor of Louisiana is going to be part of the hiring process because it is the State University of Louisiana. So,
family.
Dreamless Nation for $5. They can pay me $200K a day to say Michael Van Buren go in for Nuss and do what Marcel Reed is doing. Marcel Reed ain't bad. No, he's not. Texas A&M apparently is, and I know it's crazy. They're no Oregon. They're pretty good. Texas A&M, like impressively good. And I think the funny thing is, who are the only two undefeated teams in that league? Texas A&M and Alabama. Kalen DeBoer, and I know I've said this 100 times on the show, Kalen DeBoer is doing the job.
Roll Tide!
He's doing the job. Put your pitchforks away. Put your little torches away. Let's let Kalen DeBoer marinate a little bit. Ty Simpson, as it turns out,
bro just needs some time so he can season.
Best quarterback in the country, right? And you look at A&M, thumped LSU. Watched a lot of that game. 49 points on LSU. And I think Brian Kelly deserved to be fired. I mean, I sat here and said, as much as I hate Brian Kelly, they're one of the best teams on paper. And they turned out that was completely wrong. I'm fascinated by this argument that Oregon's a better job than LSU. I'm here for it today, you guys. I am here for it.
I think what people like to do is they like to say, oh, well, it's Oregon and the uniforms and it's Dan.
They don't have family.
Yeah, they don't have family.
Family.
Yeah, you know, so it's like it's a situation where you've got Dan Lanning You've got nice Oregon uniforms. You've got, it just feels like an attractive program right now. And I feel like a lot of people are just writing LSU off because, Mr. Family Guy has done such an ass job with this program that they haven't been competitive in the SEC. And that's the problem, is that we went into this year, Nussmeier this and Nussmeier that. Who's the next Justin Jefferson coming out of this family? And what did we get?
Okay, wait. Arthur on TikTok. What part of Nike money don't you understand? They're broke in Baton Rouge because they're paying Brian Kelly. So wait, you think they fired Brian Kelly?
Bro, you think they fired
They
Brian
know his
Kelly without
buyout.
being able to pay for it? What?
They know his buyout. Do you really think they fired him and they're like, yeah, we'll just go get some afterthought. We'll go get Dan Mullen. He'll do the job.
Like Big Boo.
Yeah, for like $100. We'll get Amika Big Boo to come coach the team for $100 a day. You really think when you're paying a guy $800,000 a month not to coach your football team, you really think you're broke? Come on, like this.
Timothy.
I'm all here for the Nike money argument. You guys really think that they're here, like they're just broke because they. Do you know what it's going to cost them to fire Brian Kelly?
A lot.
A lot.
Family.
They're probably on the hook for $1.3 million a month in coaches' salaries after this season's over. It's not just Brian Kelly. Then on top of that, they got to pay his assistants out. And then they got to pay a new head coach, probably $1 million a month. And they got to pay his assistants and all their new staff. So you're probably into Brian Kelly and his staff for $1 million, $1.3 million a month. You're probably into a new staff for $1.6 million. You're looking at almost $3 million a month in coaches' salaries. And you think, oh, they don't have any money, Monty. Come on. Do you understand how much money just does not matter in college football right now?
Yeah, let me ask the real pertinent question.
I mean,
why do you hate the SEC? Why do you hate the SEC? Because that's what this is. If Oregon had fired Dan Lanning and was paying him the same buyout, everyone would be saying, "Oh, Big Ten TV contract, they're going to be fine. Everything's good." Nobody would have any kind of concern. But because it's LSU and it's the SEC, everyone wants to say, "Oh, well, Nike money." Yeah, they have Nike money at LSU too, dude. I don't know if you know this. There's a swoosh on all their uniforms, and they've got like that purple paw that they do and everything, and like the yellow eye that's at the middle of the field, all that stuff. So they're fine. They're fine. The issue is that it's not just about Oregon. There are a bunch of people, and I understand it, who hate the SEC. And okay, I get it, but you're not getting away from the fact that LSU is factually a better job. It's a better opportunity. The percentage of, winning a natty at LSU is way higher than it is at Oregon. And I live in Eugene. I'm telling you guys, LSU is a better place to be. Like, it's not, it just is.
Yeah, I think the interesting part is that you're not, Oregon is a great football program. Oregon's a great place to be. It's great. The difference is LSU's not looking to save money on the next coach. And I think there's just this belief that, we can just again, we'll go get Dan Mullen for $2 million because we're LSU. Bro, they haven't one time thought Dan Mullen. They're thinking, I can tell you the three I have heard from multiple sources who don't know each other. Dan Lanning, my guy, Lane Kiffin. and Eli Drinkwitz at Missouri. Those three. They're not talking to coordinators. They're not talking to G5s. Maybe, hey, they can't get any of those guys. Okay. Right. I think that's now you got to open your search, but they're not going to do that. I think their first phone call will be to Nick Saban, as it should be. As it should be. And he's going to say no. But the idea that they're trying to cut corners or save money on the next coach is wild to me. Just crazy. John Teal for $5. John, how are you? Florida has to share with Miami, Florida State for talent. LSU owns the state and can buy all the state signings for a class and will never rank outside the top 10. And the difference is LSU is in the SEC, and they can go into the biggest high school in your town and take your best talent. They can go recruit anywhere. So if you take a guy like Dan Lanning or Lane Kiffin, who are dynamic recruiters, who embrace NIL, who embrace big deals, paying guys, rev sharing salaries, they embrace that, it's over. You put the top portal class and the top high school class in Baton Rouge in February, they're going to compete for a national championship next year.
Mm-hmm.
This whole thing, and Dion was the first one. Certainly, he's been a trendsetter. Come in, lop off the bottom half of that roster, get rid of the dead weight, get in the portal, get on the recruiting trail. And the funny thing is about guys like Lane Kiffin and Dan Lanning, they're already on the recruiting trail. They bring their guys with them.
Do you believe?
So you're ready-made. That's why when you talk about LSU like trying to save money on the next hire, you're crazy. They have no reason to try and save money, right? Like you think about Ed Ogeron. Ed Ogeron doesn't have a recruiting class. Ed Ogeron, like, if you look at Ed O, he's probably taking a job at the G6 level because the reports are he is desperate to get back in. And my guess is he will take a job at the G6 level because I don't think a P4 team will hire him.
No.
I really don't. Nader Tots gifted 5 Monty Show memberships. Nader, good to see you. Oh, some tots sound good right now. Bro, I had a weird nutrition day today. It was, I don't know even what time it was. It was like 9:30. I'm out in the kitchen making ground turkey and frozen corn. Like I was ready. Bro, I was ready to eat ground turkey today.